You ever notice how every conversation about money eventually splits into two camps? There's the boomers who bought houses for $40,000 and act like discipline is the only thing separating you from wealth. Then there's millennials and Gen Z drowning in student debt, complaining the system is rigged. But there's this entire generation sandwiched in the middle that nobody talks about. Generation X, born between 1965 and 1980. And their relationship with money is absolutely fascinating because they somehow exhibit the most contradictory financial behaviors of any generation alive. These are people who will stress about a $12 streaming subscription but drop $800 on Taylor Swift tickets without blinking. They have $200,000 in retirement accounts but genuinely believe they'll die broke. They refuse to trust banks but max out their 401ks religiously. They job hop constantly but stay loyal to the same coffee brand for 30 years. And here's the thing, none of this is random. Every single one of these contradictions traces back to one shared experience that fundamentally broke how they think about financial security. And once you understand it, their entire money psychology clicks into place. My name is James, and I spend way too much time thinking about why different generations handle money in completely opposite ways. If you've ever been confused by the financial advice your Gen X boss gives you, if you've noticed older colleagues who seem simultaneously wealthy and terrified, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Because today we're diving into the specific economic trauma that shaped how 65 million Americans think about every dollar they earn, spend, and save. We're talking about a generation that lived through the death of financial stability and had to invent entirely new survival strategies. And what they figured out might be the smartest approach to money in an unstable economy. Let's start with the foundational experience that defines Gen X money psychology. It's 1985. You're 12 years old. Your dad works for IBM. He's been there for 18 years. He has a pension plan that guarantees him 60% of his salary for life when he retires. Your mom works for the local hospital. She's unionized. She has job security, health care, a path to retirement. Both of them talk about money in terms of steady accumulation. You work for one company. You save consistently. You get a gold watch at retirement. The system works. But then you watch that system completely disintegrate over the next 20 years. According to research from the Pension Rights Center, in 1980, 84% of Fortune 500 companies offered defined benefit pension plans. By 2017, that number dropped to just 16%. Gen X didn't read about this in a history book. They watched it happen to their parents in real time. Your dad's pension got converted to a 401k where suddenly his retirement depends on the stock market instead of company promises. Your mom's hospital merged with a private equity firm that eliminated her union protections. This is the formative financial lesson of Generation X. Institutions lie, promises evaporate. Security is an illusion. And that belief shapes literally everything they do with money for the rest of their lives. Here's where their psychology gets really interesting. Gen X has one of the highest savings rates of any generation despite having the lowest confidence in retirement security. According to Vanguard's 2023 How America Saves report, Gen X contributes an average of 9.7% of their salary to retirement accounts. That's higher than millennials at 7.3% and only slightly below boomers at 11.2%. But when Transamerica surveyed them, 68% of Gen X said they're not confident they'll have enough money to retire comfortably. Think about that for a second. They're saving more than younger generations, but they believe it won't work. This is what behavioral economists call high-effort, low-expectation behavior. It's like preparing for a test you're convinced you're going to fail anyway. But here's why they do it. They watched what happened to people who didn't save. They saw colleagues in their 50s get laid off with nothing. They witnessed the 2008 financial crisis wipe out people who thought Social Security and home equity were enough. So they save obsessively not because they believe it guarantees security. They save because not saving guarantees disaster. It's defensive behavior. They're not planning to win. They're planning not to lose. Let me show you how this trauma manifests in their daily money decisions. Gen X pioneered what we now call the side hustle, but for completely different reasons than millennials and Gen Z. According to Federal Reserve data, 44% of Gen Xers have secondary income streams. That's higher than the 38% of millennials who do. But here's the difference. Millennials side hustle because their primary income doesn't cover expenses. Gen X side hustles because they fundamentally don't trust that their primary income will continue to exist. Your Gen X coworker who does consulting on weekends isn't trying to fund a lifestyle. She's building a lifeboat. She watched her company eliminate 3,000 jobs in 2002. She saw her manager get walked out with a cardboard box after 25 years. The lesson wasn't get better at your job. The lesson was your job will betray you. So have an escape plan. This is why they're so weird about income diversification. They'll work a $95,000 corporate job, run a $15,000 a year side business, invest in rental properties, and still feel like they're one disaster away from financial ruin. Because in their experience, they are. The difference between them and other generations is that they actually prepare for it. Now let's talk about their spending patterns because this is where Gen X really confuses people. Eventbrite research found that Gen Xers spend more on live experiences, concerts, travel, and events than any other generation in raw dollar amounts, about $30,100 per year. Meanwhile, they have the lowest spending on material goods relative to income. They'll drop $600 on Beyoncé tickets but drive a 12-year-old Honda Accord. They'll book a $4,000 European vacation but shop exclusively at Costco for groceries. This seems contradictory until you understand the logic. Material possessions depreciate. Houses can go underwater, cars lose value immediately, clothes go out of style, but experiences are immune to market crashes. Nobody can repossess a memory. You can't lose a vacation in a recession. When Gen X watched the 2008 financial crisis destroy home values, stock portfolios, and job security, the one thing that didn't get touched was their memories of the things they did before everything collapsed. This is actually genius financial psychology. In an unstable economy, experiential spending has better risk-adjusted returns than material spending. A $2,000 couch loses value every year. A $2,000 trip to Italy gives you stories for life. Gen X figured this out not through academic research, but through lived trauma. Here's another pattern that's uniquely Gen X. They're hyper-strategic about debt in ways that seem almost contradictory. Experian data shows Gen X carries the highest average total debt of any generation at about $157,000. But according to the Federal Reserve, they also have the lowest revolving credit card debt relative to income. They'll take a $350,000 mortgage but refuse to carry a $3,000 credit card balance. The psychology here is about control versus chaos. A mortgage is structured debt, fixed payment, clear timeline, predictable path to zero. You know exactly when you'll own your home. Credit card debt is unstructured chaos. Interest compounds. Minimum payments barely touch principal. It can spiral indefinitely. Gen X grew up watching their parents drown in credit card debt the 1980s and 90s when easy credit exploded and interest rates hit 18 to 20%. According to research from the University of Michigan, household credit card debt increased by 340% between 1980 and 2000, faster than income growth. Gen X saw this firsthand. They watched their parents make minimum payments for years and still owe more than they started with. So they learned to distinguish between leveraged debt that builds assets and consumptive debt that destroys futures. They'll borrow to buy a rental property. They won't borrow to buy a flat-screen TV. Same debt mechanism, completely different psychological framing. Let's talk about their relationship with financial advice because this is fascinating. According to Cerulli Associates, only 28% of Gen Xers work with a traditional financial advisor. That's the lowest of any generation. Boomers are at 42%. Even millennials are at 31%. But here's the twist. Research from Fidelity shows Gen X spends more time researching financial strategies and managing their own portfolios than any other age group. They don't want help, but they're obsessed with doing it right. This makes perfect sense when you consider their formative experience. They watched financial advisors sell their parents' high-fee mutual funds that underperformed. They saw trusted experts recommend mortgage products that exploded in 2008. They witnessed Bernie Madoff, Enron, WorldCom, massive institutional fraud that destroyed people who trusted the professionals. So what did they do? They said, fine, I'll learn it myself. Gen X is the last generation that came of age when self-education was actually feasible. They read personal finance books. They build Excel spreadsheets to model retirement scenarios. They teach themselves about asset allocation and tax optimization, not because they're naturally financially gifted, because they genuinely believe that trusting experts is more dangerous than figuring it out themselves. Here's a behavior that seems old-fashioned but is actually brilliant risk management. According to ARP research, 61% of Gen Xers maintain physical paper records of important financial documents. Compare that to just 34% of millennials. And before you write this off as technological incompetence, remember Gen X literally built the internet. They're not keeping paper records because they don't understand digital systems. They're keeping them because they remember when digital systems failed. They lived through the early 2000s when companies lost customer data. They saw databases get corrupted and records disappear. They experienced websites going offline and taking account information with them. So they practice redundancy by design. They use digital banking apps and keep paper statements. They store documents in the cloud and keep physical copies in a fireproof safe. It seems excessive until you've watched a bank tell you they have no record of a transaction you know you made. This is the core of Gen X financial psychology. Trust systems enough to use them, but never trust them completely. Always have a backup. Always assume failure is possible. Now let's talk about their brand loyalty because this reveals something deep about how they process trust. Adobe conducted research showing Gen Xers are 34% more likely than millennials to stick with brands they used in their youth even when cheaper or better alternatives exist. They'll still buy Levi's jeans, still drink Coke, still use Tide detergent. The same brands for 30 years, but at the same time, they have zero company loyalty. They'll switch jobs every 3 years without hesitation. They'll walk away from a 10-year employment relationship for a 15% raise somewhere else. So what's going on? Why are they loyal to brands but not employers? Because brands didn't betray them. Employers did. That bottle of Tide from 1992 still cleans clothes the same way in 2025. It kept its promise. But the company that promised your dad a pension and then converted it to a 401k, that broke its promise. Your workplace that promised upward mobility and then outsourced your department broke its promise. Gen X learned to separate the things that stay consistent from the things that lie. Products stay consistent, institutions lie. So they're loyal to products and ruthless with institutions. Here's what all of this means for how Gen X approaches retirement. According to the National Institute on Retirement Security, Gen X has a median retirement account balance of $40,000 at age 45. That sounds terrifyingly low, but 68% of them also have secondary income streams, side businesses, rental properties, multiple financial contingencies that don't show up in traditional retirement metrics. They're not following the conventional path of accumulate, retire, withdraw. They're building parallel systems that keep generating cash flow indefinitely. This is the ultimate Gen X money strategy. Don't rely on any single system working. Build redundancy into everything, have multiple income sources, diversify across assets, maintain liquidity, trust nothing completely. It's exhausting, but for a generation that watched every promise break, it's the only rational response. Here's the thing about Generation X that nobody says out loud. They're right to be paranoid. They watched pensions disappear. They saw the dot-com bubble destroy early internet wealth. They experienced 9/11 economic shock. They got hit by the 2008 financial crisis right when they should have been building peak wealth in their 30s and 40s. They lived through COVID at an age where career disruption is devastating. They're not pessimists. They're accurate observers. The system promised them stability and delivered chaos, so they adapted. They became financial survivalists with retirement accounts. They save like boomers but trust nothing like Gen Z. They work corporate jobs while building escape tunnels. They spend on what can't be taken away and save for disasters they know are coming. And honestly, that might be the smartest money psychology in America right now, because the next crisis is always coming. Gen X knows it. They've seen it 5 times already. The difference is they're ready. If this changed how you think about money across generations, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe. Next week, we're breaking down why millennials and Gen Z have completely opposite money trauma and what that means for the next 20 years of the economy. I'm James, and I'll see you in the next one. Your money habits aren't personality traits, they're survival responses to the world you grew up in.